We're glad you're watching today. We invite you to listen as we talk about some tough issues today in single adult ministry. I'm Dennis Frank, and we have some leaders with us here today. We're going to be talking today about a couple of the tough issues in the group, and then a couple of the tough issues in leadership teams. So I want to start with a couple of tough issues we're facing in the group. Probably if you have a single adult ministry or you're going to start one, eventually you'll come across this issue, and that is the one of people sleeping together outside of marriage. They're coming to the group, they're sexually involved. How would we address this issue, panel? Does it happen in the group, and what do you think? How would we address this issue?
Yeah, absolutely, Dennis. I think this is an issue that is unfortunately pretty common. We're going to have to address this and deal with this. Maybe you're not doing that right now in your group, but I think the first thing that we could understand is sometimes in the church, we want people the lost to act like the saved, and unfortunately they're just not going to do that. And I think we would all agree that we would like our churches to be places of acceptance where people could come in that are seeking and searching to fill that spiritual need in their heart, and that they would find that in a relationship in Jesus Christ through our love and through the experience that we have with them. But in order for that to happen, they're going to have to find a place of acceptance and belonging. And years ago in the church, yesterday in the church, you had to behave a certain way, and then you had to believe a certain way, and then ultimately you would end up over here belonging. But today in the church, if we're going to be relevant to the people in our communities, the people that Christ has commanded us to reach out to, we're very much going to have to adopt a philosophy of helping them to belong, helping them to build relationships and connect first. Then through those relationships, they're going to come to a place of belief in Christ, and then ultimately their behavior is going to change to mirror and model that of the life of Christ. That's really the new model if we want to be relevant today and address issues such as this.
And I think as leaders, one of our responsibilities is to be able to teach that God restores purity, and that there's a great study that I have used called the Soul Virgins that walks people through that process and what it's like as a believer to be able to live according to what the truth of God's Word demands. Not portraying a picture of having to live according to this set of rules, as Kevin said, in order to belong, but rather to be accepted and to be able to understand and be able to grow in Christ, and then their behavior changes. That God has this huge umbrella of protection, and if we can help them to see that and be proactive.
Yes. Yeah. Would you ever teach this issue or teach sexuality in the group, and kind of a group teaching, counseling setting that way? Would that help? Or do you address this issue individually with the people? I'm talking about the people that attend the group now. What would you think?
Actually, that's a very good question, Dennis. In our ministry, within the year, we actually taught that. And actually, I think that you had a big part of that, Dennis. It was called Living Pure in an Impure World, and it's a 6 CD, DVD series, and our group was really fulfilled by the teachings of that. I think that it was delivered properly, and I think that the group gathered a lot from this.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Absolutely, Dennis, teaching is definitely one of the best ways. And again, we have to understand our audience. We're not teaching necessarily here to leadership or dealing with leadership. That's a different issue. But these are people that are attending the group, and so we have to understand that getting before them and teaching them is definitely a very relevant and valid way to address this issue. Also, a second way, if you have relationship, and let me really paraphrase this: if you have relationship with this particular person or this couple, then you can address this directly with them. But you really have to gauge that on your relationship with them, because you can rush in and not have a relationship, and you will end up alienating and stressing that person, and they can be stalled on their entire journey and leave and may not come back around on their spiritual journey for quite a while. But really the way that you hope and want this to be handled within your group is really peer-to-peer. You're hoping that people that are involved in this type of behavior that they're in at least one accountable relationship. Maybe they're in a small group with someone, and you're hoping that out of love and concern, a single adult friend, instead of running to you, hey, Pastor Kevin, hey, Dennis, did you hear that Johnny and Susie so-and-so? What you want in that situation is you want that person out of that same love and concern, instead of running to you, to go back to them and say, hey, I see this in your life. I'm concerned for you about this. This is a dead-end path. This doesn't lead in the right direction. This is not pleasing to God, and you're just going to get hurt. And you want that peer-to-peer interaction and accountability. And I would say that's by far the best way. But yes, teaching to the group and then addressing it directly if you have a relationship. But then really peer-to-peer is the best way.
Very good. Yeah, great comments. This kind of leads into another aspect, possible challenge with sexual activity in a group. Sometimes we're going to have people who are either homosexual or gay or lesbian or transgender, bisexual, we're going to have those people in our group.
Yeah.
How would you deal with that? Very similarly, would you deal with that issue very similarly to heterosexual premaritally?
Dennis, the LGBT agenda is becoming more and more common in our society and even in our churches, and it's an issue that we're going to have to address head on. But I would say, and you kind of alluded to that, what we're ultimately talking about here is sexual sin. We're talking about two people, whether they be male and female, or two males or two females. We're talking about two people acting out in a sinful behavior that does not honor God. Or really each other in how and what they're doing. And so, in all honesty, we're great in the church at stigmatizing and categorizing sin. I mean, we're good at that, a little too good. But what we should be better at is loving people. I remember an old saying that my grandmother used to say, and she was from a completely different generation, and that is, love the sinner but hate the sin. And we should be great at that. As Christians filled with the love of Christ, we should be great at doing that. And so I don't think that this is a separate process. I don't think that we categorize or stigmatize this. I think that we deal with LGBT issues with the same grace and love that we do with the first question that you asked, as folks coming together and sleeping together. That same three-step process that I outlined just a few minutes ago, that's the same way you would deal with this issue.
Right.
I agree with Kevin on that. I think that's sometimes a fine issue for Christians, though. We tend to level our sins. This sin is worse than that one. But sin is sin, and we need to use our Bible as our standard and just reach out and love people. It's not our job to convict them or condemn them. We're there to reach out, to love them, to show them Christ's love, and to draw them to Christ. And we just need to know that sin happens to all of us.
Right.
It's not, as a Christian, it's not that we did sin. We do sin. And every day we have to get forgiveness. And so does everybody else.
Right.
So we just need to show that love.
And the only qualifier to that is that we're talking here about attendees in your group. We're not talking about leadership.
Right.
Leadership comes under a whole different standard, which you have the opportunity, when you invite them to be part of your team, to query them, find out where they're at, and set your standards according to what you want and according to biblical standards. So we're not talking about leadership. We're talking about attendees, in which there's always a balance between grace and truth. And that's one caution that we want to make, because we would tend to make this a blanketed statement and find that we've opened the door for leaders in an area that we really aren't comfortable with at that point.
Yeah. Excellent comments, yes. Good. This is helpful for people who are beginning a ministry or who are in the first few years. They're asking these type of questions. Mm-hmm. Let's move to a second tough issue in the general attendance of a single adult ministry. We get the question regarding age. I had it just last week. I had a person email me. What age is a single adult ministry? Is it 20s and 30s? Is it 30s and 40s? Is it 40s and 50s? I've been in single adult ministry a long time, and I've seen the ages go up in a ministry. I want to ask you if you have seen this. What is a typical age of a single adult ministry today? What do you think?
Well, Dennis, I would like to respond to that. I find that your most effective single adult ministries are when you're ministering to people who are within 10 years of the age of the leadership. So if you're a 40-year-old person, then you might be able to reach up to 50-year-old groups or down to 30-year-old people. And as you grow older, then that group is going to change because you have identifiers that they have in your life, common interests and things like that. So that group is going to change. And we need to be comfortable with that. We need to realize that God has placed us in a moment in history for a group that is with us, that He's called us to serve, and not feel like we have to reach outside of our experience or our own age groups.
Although there will be some people, maybe younger or older than that,
Yeah.
coming, but probably 80% of the attendance would fit within that age group. Like you said, as we get older, the group gets a little older. I have seen that today it is an older ministry than 20, 30 years ago. And there are some other reasons. Anybody else have a comment on that?
I think one of the things has to do with the stigma that goes along with being single. And we live in so much more of a single society, both outside the church and inside the church, than we did 10 years ago, 20 years ago, that so often we'll hear from people, well, a singles group, I'm not necessarily looking for anybody. But that's our field. Those are the individuals that we are intending to reach. There's a multitude of number of reasons why people would become a part of a singles ministry. And as leadership, it's our responsibility to go after them and make ourselves available for them. But yes, the age group's going up. Another issue that I think is that people are comfortable in the groups that they're a part of. They develop friendships in that, and as that group ages up, so do they.
Sure.
It's true.
Overall, America is aging, and we have to be prepared for that. If you lead a singles group now, you just need to know that they are aging inside your group, and America overall is aging. There are 40 million Americans 65 and up right now, and it's going to continue that way. There are fewer babies being born, and so there will be fewer children as the years go on. It's an aging society. And we have to be ready for that because there's a whole bunch of other needs that come up as people age. Aging alone, people who don't have anybody around them to help them as they age. That will become an issue for singles ministries to address. Taking care of those people who need someone because their health is failing, because they're aging, they don't have the same abilities that they had. That's something, a support that singles can be for each other.
And we are finding across the country that as single adults get older, especially 60 and older, many of them don't want to relate or go into the senior adult group or the second half of life group. They're still working, they're healthy, and they think the seniors group, which many churches now call 55 or 60 plus, they're not ready for that because they don't have a cane or a walker, and so they want to identify with the single adults more than the senior adults. These are good comments.
Can I add something real quick to that, Dennis, as well? That's on the top end. On the bottom end of the spectrum, I think that we're finding also that people are waiting much longer to get married now in America. And so you have people that don't even consider themselves single until they end up 32, 33, 34 years old, and all of a sudden they look around and most of their friends are married, like, oh, well, I guess I am single. You know, and oftentimes getting back to what Laurie said, that stigma of being single, even when you have a person that age a lot of times these days, they don't consider themselves to be single until they begin looking for a relationship. So you can find a person that's a young career college-age person, and they're fulfilled and they're passionate and they're giving themselves to a cause, and they're not even stopping to worry or think about that, but then all of a sudden they wind up 35 or so and they realize, well, you know, I guess it is time to settle down and have a family and things like that. And all these things, both the top-end issues and the bottom-end issues, are pushing that average age of singles ministry older and older in America.
Let's move, if we can, to some tough issues in leadership. The first issues we addressed were some tough issues in the group, or the attendance. But now let's talk about the leadership of the ministry. The people who are overseeing something, they're helping you, not just the key leader, but the ones who are working with you in a leadership position. One of the issues we've seen and heard about is lack of commitment. And there are some reasons for that. First of all, do you see this in your ministries, the lack of commitment, and what are some of the reasons for this?
I think one of the things that is bothersome to me is how busy our society is, and just people in general are so busy that we're looking at people that are working full-time jobs and raising families and still volunteering hours at the church, and trying to be sensitive to that as a leader, to not ask too much of them. And how much is too much? Some people are able to do way more than others, but to be able to be sensitive to that. Last thing we want is for people to burn out on our watch. So to be careful and to be cautious.
At times also, when we find that we have a lack of commitment with some of our ministries, it's because some of the volunteer base, when they do commit, they don't see a way out. There's not a end duration, if you will, for their tour. So what we recommend is possibly giving them a 90-day, maybe a 6-month day work tour, so that way they can see that there is a light at the end of the tunnel, that they can commit themselves to the ministry for 6 months or for 3 months and work in conjunction with possibly another team, maybe set up another leadership team with them. So that way they can work together and they can avoid the burnout or the lack of commitment.
You mentioned burnout. Two of you mentioned the word burnout. What does that look like? How would you recognize possibly that a person is burning out in their ministry?
Well, I think burnout is when you really lose the passion that you had. You become fatigued to the point where you just don't have the energy or the concern anymore towards something. And sometimes you may just need somebody to come alongside you and start to carry that burden with you again, to reignite the passion that you had at one time. Some of our people that have burned out are actually the most expertise in the field. Mm-hmm. They've gone through the ropes and they really know what they're doing. They just need somebody to come along and encourage them and help them with the process, and they can avoid that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
One more thing on that. I think if you look back and you start organizing your leadership team, to really search for the person's giftings. Mm-hmm. If you put somebody who has the gift of service up front, they're a background person, and they'll last longer in their position because they just want to serve. They want to clean up, they want to make the coffee, they want to do those service jobs. And if you place them in the wrong leadership position, they will start making up reasons why they're not coming. So make sure that you use the giftings as a tool to assign your leadership.
Can I mention one other thing also that just came to my mind when you're talking, Jill? It is amazing how far a thank you note will go to the people who are volunteering in your ministries. You can spend 50 cents or $1 on a thank you note in just a couple of minutes of writing a thank you to somebody, and you will gain that person for another 6 months in your ministry in volunteerism. That will go a long ways to preventing burnout and to encouraging them in their ministry work.
Maybe that's a way, if we only have 3 leaders and we're trying to look for more, we just write 3 thank you notes and hope that they'll stay another 6 months.
Yeah, that just might work.
I think one of the things too that as leaders that we have to prepare for is knowing how to choose our leaders. Sometimes we have a history of grabbing a warm body. And there's good material that's out there to teach us what to look for in good leaders. One of them is Sam Chand, has a series called Who's Holding Your Ladder? And just basically he's talking about how he's at the top of a ladder and who's going to hold that ladder so that he doesn't fall off. You know, be it the vision of the ministry or the job that needs to get done or whatever it might be. What do we need to find in that individual to come alongside the work of the ministry?
Sure.
If we're more proactive on that end, I think we'll avoid some of the things that we just talked about even.
Right.
Very good. Thanks for mentioning that. And by the way, we also have a video that we did last year, right on the website, about developing and training and motivating leadership. So take a look at that, folks. Let's go to a second issue that we have heard and seen across the country, dealing with leadership, a tough issue. And that is making decisions. Here's the question. When is it appropriate for the director, pastor, key leader to make the decision, a decision, and when is it appropriate to have the team, the 3, 4, 5, 10 leadership people together make that decision, a consensus? So we're talking about consensus versus control, basically.
Dennis, I'd like to respond to that just briefly. I like to think that there are certain things that are worth dying for, a hill worth dying for. Those are things that might be theological issues, they might be truths that you don't want to compromise, and perhaps if you're in a ministry with a church, these are truths that your pastor or your church board might feel are important enough that you can't compromise on. Know what those are and fight for those. But there are so many things that in relating to a ministry that just aren't worth dying for. And you can have a consensus of a board. I work with a board, a ministry team, and I allow them to make those decisions. What they help create, they're going to help support, and they're going to be with me through that process. And so I let them make those decisions. And it isn't always perfect, and it doesn't have to be always perfect. I mean, this is the whole nature of ministry, is that God uses our giftings and He allows grace to permeate through everything. Let it be somewhat imperfect, but let it be their ideas. Let the consensus control the day on those things.
That's a good point, Craig, and I appreciate you saying that, because I think it's important as leaders that we are a part of casting the vision.
Right.
But after we cast the vision, to allow the leadership team or even the people that we're training to go there and to then work out the details, to make the decisions, to keep us notified. That's huge. But let them work in their giftings, like you had said earlier. I think that's key. But above all, let them work in the ministry so that way God can flourish in their gifts and their talents, and they can really be fruitful at that point.
That's good, Adam. You know, the word ownership comes to my mind, and think about property, think about houses. I mean, I think we all would say in America that in general, property owners treat their own houses better than a renter would.
Sure.
And so when you allow a volunteer to come in and to have some decision-making power, and what that does is that empowers them and helps them to feel part of ownership of that ministry, and that's what you want. And I think ultimately what we're talking about here is that people will support what they help to create.
Yes.
And so anytime as you as a leader can empower that leadership team or those volunteers under you, and you can help them feel a part that they own, that they have an investment in your ministry and what you're creating, then you have really won a powerful advocate in your ministry that's going to do the work of the ministry, that's going to be passionate, that's going to be exciting, and that's just going to snowball with the people that they work with alongside, or the people that are even on their team. And so you want to produce that ownership feel and allow them to create and control as much as you can outside of these big rocks, Craig and Adam, that you guys talked about.
I agree with that. Letting them make decisions, giving them ownership. They're not junior high kids anymore. These are adults, 30, 40, 50, 60 years old. Many times they have responsibilities to make decisions at work, but in the church, we don't give them that always that freedom. Well, time is getting away from us. Let's move to just one more issue, possibly, in leadership that is a tough issue. And that is that sometimes we have to deal with challenges, discipline challenges. Finding the balance between grace and mercy and justice and strong discipline. That's a tough challenge sometimes. Give us some comments on that. How do we find that difference, that balance between grace and justice as it pertains to our leadership teams?
You know, Dennis, I think right off the bat we have to understand the context of your question, and that the standard is higher on this level. We are now talking about leadership. We're talking about people that are stepping up and leading areas of your single adult ministry. And so the expectation is higher on them. And these are people that have influence on other people that attend your group. And so, of course, their behavior is not only important to themselves and those they're in a relationship with, but their behavior is important for the entire group. And so I think you have to ask the question, how is this going to affect the group? Right. How is the behavior of this leader going to affect the entire group? And you have to come to the understanding that the group is more important than the individual. And we have to guard that unity of the group, and we have to make sure, as long as the leader's influence is positive, let them influence, let them lead. But if that influence crosses over and becomes negative, that has to be cut off very quickly, or your group is damaged very quickly.
I think in the case of having to deal with a leader that has fallen into sin or fallen to some behavior that is improper, our goal as leaders has to be restorative.
Yes.
So our prayer is always that they would have a repentant spirit over what happened, that they're broken over what happened, and have a desire to be restored. Then we can wrap our arm around them and walk with them on that path of restoration. I think the goal has to always be restorative. Now, there are some that will not be repentant, and then justice has to rule. We have to ask them to fully step out of the things that they're in. But our goal as leaders is always to restore the broken and bind up their wounds, and that's what we do.
That certainly is, I like what you said, Lori. The goal is redeeming them, redemptive. Single adult ministry basically is redeeming lives and then helping to prevent future similar issues. So we want to be redemptive and preventive. Well, this has been a great discussion. Thanks for your comments. I know this is helpful to people across the country. We get these questions. And let me just encourage you, go to our national website, singles.ag.org. We'll put that on the screen here for you. And you'll see a lot of leadership helps, plus this video under the media download button, and many other videos that we've done. It's been great talking with you, and feel free to call us, call these leaders. Their pictures and information, email address is on the website too. God bless you as you reach single adults for Him.